This is the DigitalKS podcast, a podcast about all things digital humanities. I am your host, David Tamez, and on our episode today, we start a second season exploring the wonderful digital projects being conducted on KU's campus. This season will be placing a special emphasis on projects that attempt to illuminate histories untold or attempt to place new light on old ones. My guest today is Dr. Sylvia Fernández, a postdoc fellow at the University of Kansas. Dr. Fernandez's work focuses primarily on borderland narratives, and through United Fronteras provides a platform for untold stories at the border. The DigitalKS podcast is produced by the Institute for Digital Research and the Humanities at the University of Kansas. You can find our podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, and online at idrh.ku.edu. Thank you for listening and enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second season of the DigitalKS podcast, a podcast about all things digital humanities. I am your host, David Tamez, and on this season of DigitalKS, we continue our exploration of the wonderful DH projects on campus. My guest today is Dr. Sylvia Fernández. Dr. Fernández is a postdoc fellow working with the Hall Center for the Humanities, IDRH, and KU Commons. Dr. Fernández, thank you for joining me today.
No, thank you, David, for putting up this space and for doing this work.
Of course, and to sort of help us get into our conversation, could you begin by giving our audience a sense of who you are as a person and generally about your research as a humanist and a digital humanist?
Absolutely. Thank you for these questions. And first of all, I'm a proud transfronteriza, a transporter, born and raised in the border cities of Ciudad Juárez and El Paso, Texas. 14 hours drive from Lawrence, Kansas. And kind of my academic background, I earned my double bachelor's in political science and Spanish at New Mexico State University, as well as my master's degree in Spanish with a concentration in literature. And just recently, in December of 2019, I received my doctoral degree from the Hispanic Studies Department at the University of Houston. And currently, I'm working as the Public and Digital Humanities Postdoctoral Fellow at the University of Kansas. And as a Latina scholar and digital humanist, my research and my scholarships intersects with personal and communal stories in order to challenge oppressive and patriarchal political rhetorics that have been in the past and in the present and shape our cultures and our understanding of being human or dehumanizing. So that's kind of the work that I do, and that's part of who I am.
Given that this podcast is about not just the humanities, but also a growing field within the humanities, namely the digital humanities, I thought I'd ask you what exactly brought you to DH as a field of research?
In 2017, when together with my colleague Mayra Alvarez, we started thinking about a project that could visualize the border in another perspective rather than the one that was in the political rhetorics in that time with the administration of Trump. So we created Borderlands Archives Cartography, which is a project that maps newspapers from mid-19th century to the 20th century in order to show this trans-border archive of newspaper that show the transitions of the border. So that took me completely to the path of digital humanities, in which you're using archives, you're using maps, but you're also bringing up all this knowledge that the humanities provides. And that's where I started seeing what was the importance of my project, what I had to adjust to create this project more stable. So all these things that make digital humanities very important. But if I go back to initiating Borderlands Archives Cartography, I had always been frustrated about how the border was represented also in academia. Like a lot of border studies emphasize this violence and this colonial rhetoric. So for me that I'm from the border, that made me anxious because it is important to visualize all these issues, but at the same time, it is important not to dehumanize these areas because people live there. And I always wanted to be involved in projects or in research that can bring to the forefront the complexity of the border. And not invisibilize all the issues of the border, but also show other faces, show other stories to it. And digital humanities, it showed me that it can be an interdisciplinary work collaboration. That is not just my ideas, it is ideas from other fields that add on the understanding, as well as it allows that all this work is accessible. So that was very important for me because, again, as a border person, I was doing this kind of research, but outside of my hometown. And for me, that was something problematic that through digital humanities, it is possible to reach out to these communities and to make this work accessible. Another thing that led me to digital humanities is the community that it's there, that has been formed there in DH, where a lot of scholars of color are encouraging more other scholars of color to be involved in projects, in events. So that made me feel comfortable, made me feel that I was welcome to create this digital scholarship. So that was kind of my initial parts of digital as a digital humanist.
You've mentioned a number of projects that you've been working on. I wanted to talk about another one that you've sort of been focusing on the last 2 years or so, and that's United Fronteras. Could you tell us about that project?
Absolutely. Well, United Fronteras, it's an in-progress project that I'm continuing working, and just yesterday we just launched the digital exhibit of the U.S. Mexico border in Spanish. But what United Fronteras is that it creates transborder digital cultural records in order to create a digital memory of the borderlands. So in the first part, the project focuses on different borderlands, but on the first phase, it's just the U.S.-Mexico border. Later on, we will be moving forward to other borderlands. What happens with the U.S.-Mexico borderlands in the first instance was to identify and document material and projects that use any digital component or tool to visualize or expose the encounters and disencounters of border regions. So this can be blogs, this can be archives that you can find in Facebook or in academic platforms, a lot of projects that are using mapping, a lot of YouTube channels, but all these projects are visualizing different perspectives of the U.S.-Mexico border. So we identify this, we document this with different information such as title, who were the authors, where was this material hosted, a brief description of it. And we created what I call the transborder data because it's all mixed. It's not divided between the United States projects and the Mexico projects. It was all together. And that is giving us different forms of understanding how the border is shaped in the digital cultural record. Later on, together with the team that is involving United Fronteras, we contacted the authors of these projects if they agreed to be documented. And this was a procedure that we decided to do particularly because some projects will not like to be categorized as borderlands projects, or because they don't want to be that much visualized. In other cases, emerge. But what United Fronteras does after gathering all this data is to visualize this digital memory. And it's being how we visualize this is through a digital exhibit in English and Spanish. We decided that those two were the languages that we will use on the U.S.-Mexico border. And we're currently working on a map that will visualize all these projects, but the map, it's intended to be flipped in order for the audience to deconstruct the idea of understanding maps in border regions. So it will be upside down, and there will not be any sign that lets you know where you're at. You will be more guided towards the projects that are telling you the story of this area. So that's kind of what United Fronteras is. Another aspect that United Fronteras does is that, as you mentioned, we are humanist scholars from different fields. So this project is giving us different trainings of creating data, of creating these exhibits, these maps, and working in collaborations and at distance. So those kind of things are also United Fronteras is doing. It's forming digital humanists from different fields. And in the future, we intend to also reach the authors of the projects that we compile in order to also provide workshops about digital humanities and create a bigger consciousness of how to maintain these projects, where to look for grants, and create this border community. And that's one of the main values that we want to do. It's to create a community in which we can help each other in different forms. So as I mentioned, United Fronteras currently it's working on the U.S.-Mexico border, but later on we will be working with other borderlands such as the Colombia-Venezuela border or Dominican Republic and Haiti. Those are some examples.
And next, could you tell us about the general computing principles that the project implements and the platform that it uses?
So the project is hosted in different platforms, as you see. So at the beginning, we created a stop website that was made by DECO in order to just promote the call for projects. Later on, once we compile all this data and we went through the process of verifying everything, we created these digital exhibits. In WAX, it's a platform using minimal computing, which we became familiarized with how basics of computation. And we created two, because the platform doesn't have until now a function or a plugin that allows you to do it bilingual or trilingual. So we decided to go on the path of technological disobedience, which means that we created two exhibits and we guide the visitor in the main page to visit either or. So that's kind of it. And then the map will also be continuing using minimal computing principles, where we will be creating the map with Leafit and JavaScript. So that requires a process of learning these tools. But the good thing is that all these digital resources, we don't have the risk that will disappear because we don't pay subscriptions or we don't belong to an institution anymore. We have the control of our own data and of our own project with all these digital resources.
When you first started talking about United Fronteras, you mentioned that the website includes projects from a number of perspectives about the issue of immigration, the issue of accounting for the voices at the border. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you went about in choosing the projects that you approached.
Yeah, so that's a really important question. And what the criteria was I learned a lot from Borderlands Archives Cartography when we were selecting the newspapers that were considered as part of the border area. So in United Fronteras, the criteria with the U.S.-Mexico borderlands, we were considering projects since pre-colonial times. So that means that we will be identifying projects that visualize what happened in this area before it was colonized or the Spanish Empire interfere in this area. So that means that we understand that border in a more broader way. So all California will be included, all New Mexico will be included, all Texas will be included, and the other states that were part of Mexico before 1848. So that means that a lot of those projects visualize indigenous communities, indigenous lands. And that was part of one of the protocols. Later on, we move until the present, and the present means just the border of the region that we understand right now. So it's just the cities and the towns that are close to this geopolitical division from both sides, right? Another aspect that was also considered was, but what are we, why we don't call these digital humanities projects? As you see, we're not identifying just digital humanities projects. We're identifying material and projects that use a digital component or a tool, because we know that a lot of projects don't call themselves digital humanities. So that's why we make a more broad definition of what we understand as digital humanities. And we started identifying some of these digital tools. So it can be, as I mentioned, blogs, it can be some archives that can be on Omeka, but also other archives that can be on Facebook, on Instagram. And that's how we refer. You will also see a lot of projects that are in museums or are made by artists who are using a digital tool to talk about the border, such as Border Turner, which use some reflectors to tell a poem out loud and unify both areas into a Juárez El Paso. That's kind of one of the examples. But that's kind of the criteria that we went through. We went from pre-colonial times, considering projects that talk about a more, not about the border itself, but the territory that was before the Spanish Empire. And then we moved towards the territory that it was defined in 1848, as well in regards to what were borderlands projects. And then the other one was the technical or digital aspect of it. Mostly all these projects are being created in the U.S. and Mexico. We haven't included any other project that it's being done in other parts of the world.
So you mentioned that the project operates with a broad view of what should or what does count as digital humanities. Was that a pragmatic decision to include as many projects as you could, to include local and academic voices into the project? Or is this also making a statement about how we should define digital humanities so that we can incorporate as many voices as we can? Although this remains a difficult task generally within the field.
Yes, well, that's tricky, because in some places and in some moments it is important to define what is digital humanities, because then it can take you to another path completely. But in this case, we decided to amplify the concept and the definition of digital humanities, particularly because United Fronteras is a pioneer in what is borderlands digital humanities. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of projects that are not in the area of digital humanities because they emerge as independent projects. They emerge in other fields, in other disciplines of study, So now that they are becoming introduced into the digital humanities, they are bringing up a lot of things that the concept of digital humanities didn't have before, or vice versa. Digital humanities is adding to these projects in the sense of maintenance, sustainability, ethical aspects. So in that sense, I think the important thing of not defining digital humanities for this project as it is in the field, it was because it is important to take the good and the bad from both sides, particularly because this is shaping and this is something in progress. Also, the definition of digital humanities will be different in Mexico and will be different in the United States. In this case, since we want to unite this region, there will be the emerge of a digital humanities from the borderlands, that it will intersect both perspectives and both definitions, because we have to consider the funding, the ways that DH is being developed in the US and the ways that it's being developed in Mexico. So intersecting the various definitions in this borderlands will bring up other understandings of DH.
Oh, that's interesting. Could you expand on that last point regarding the differences in histories between how DH developed in Mexico versus how it developed in the United States?
Yes, absolutely. Well, there is this instance that DH it's more dominant in the United States or in Europe. So a lot of the critique from Mexico or Latin America is that that is not true. Like, digital humanities in the US is not teaching Mexico or Latin America. They have been creating their own projects, their own methods, but they didn't call themselves digital humanities. So in that sense, that's one of the differences between one side and the other. In the United States, there is more funding, more support to create these really developed digital humanities projects. In Mexico and in Latin America, there are few centers, but many independent scholars or nonprofit organizations are creating this work, which means that they will go from local practices and from small projects. And that doesn't mean that they're less valuable. It's that since they don't have these big grants and this funding, or sometimes this technology, they are working through other methods and creating small projects. So that's kind of some of the differences between one side and the other one.
I want to turn our conversation to this next question about what in particular to DH and the methods that it involves and that it has produced make it a useful way of producing projects like yours, like United Fronteras and others.
Yes, well, so as I mentioned digital humanities and digital methods had been used for a long time. But I think that in the present, what digital humanities and digital methods are bringing to the table and are giving an advantage to a lot of scholars and community itself is to create their own projects. It's to create their own ways of research, their own ways to connect with other communities. So that's kind of one of the main things that digital humanities, I think, is doing, that it's allowing and giving the opportunity to many people to emerge in this area by creating their own initiatives, by creating their own projects, by collaborating with other peers from all over the world. Sometimes in a dissertation, that's not allowed, right? You are the one that is doing the research, you are the one that is writing, and then you become successful with your own research. And that's not bad, but here I see it more as some ways that you're able to move forward and work with communities, express a lot of ideas or a lot of things that in the written form it's not possible. And you can create these maps, you can create these exhibits, you can create this network analysis to visualize other things that sometimes are limited in the written research. So I think that's one of the main things that digital humanities and DH methods are giving up. It's also amplifying the voices, right? It's more of allowing Black communities to tell their own stories, to create these counter stories. Latino communities, in this case, borderlands communities. So that it's very rich because you now see a lot of intersectionalities, but also voices that come from the own people that have experienced these issues, or people that have understand a lot of history from other perspectives.
Great. Thank you, Sylvia. One of the things that I've come to appreciate about the digital humanities and the researchers that engage in these projects is that it shows the potential for the humanities to broaden its horizons, to explore new ways of conducting research, to do humanities, to do humanist work. That one of the final statements you said and appeared to demonstrate that the digital humanities can itself serve as a critique of traditional standards or traditional ways of conducting research.
Yes, absolutely. Access is something that digital humanities is dismantling, or probably it's challenging a lot of institutions of scholars to work in a way that a book can really be accessible to others. Because yes, it is a book that just a group of people will be reading. Why? Because of the price, because it's being distributed just in certain bookstores. But in this case, DH is opening up these dialogues about, well, I want to create this exhibit, but I don't have access to this archive because it's in New York and it's held by an institution that only allows their students to work with that material. So those kind of dialogues and those kind of questions is moving towards what is accessibility and how a lot of things are not being visible because of that, because of a lot of restrictions of copyrights in accessibility, but how some scholars in DH and some projects in DH are questioning this and are moving towards making more accessible this. We also have to keep in mind that accessibility in DH, and not everything has to be accessible. There is a lot of information. There is a lot of visualizations even that cannot be visualized. Why? Because it puts in risk people. We have to respect a lot of material that their own communities doesn't want to put on the digital record, because in that sense they will lose control of this material. So in that sense, I think DH it's making you think more about what it means accessibility, and for who is that accessibility, and what are the ethics that we have to take into consideration.
For my final question here, and kind of bringing our conversation to a close, wondering if you can speak a little bit to what you think the future of DH might be, and also if you can, if there are any projects that you've come by and think that are worth noting here.
I think what is the future of DH? The future of DH is very broad. And I think right now with COVID-19, DH it's in the forefront of seeing the importance of a lot of knowing digital tools, of working with the humanities and these technologies that some of them are accessible, some of them are not that accessible, you have to pay. So I think the future of DH, it's more in the forefront right now with this pandemic. how we have to consider a lot of the technologies that are surveilling people, how a lot of these technologies are allowing us to have this interview, and how a lot of projects, for example, United Fronteras, we advanced in the digital exhibits during this pandemic because we had more time to work with it. Everyone was at their house, and through Zoom, through Skype, and through Google Sheets, as well as the WAX, we were able to create this without being all together. The pandemic didn't stop us to do this. So I think the future of the age is to continue shaping it. And I think it's important to always, for everyone that is involved in DH, to have that mind that this field will require you to learn more tools, to learn more ways of researching and doing scholarship, rather than stabilizing and just doing one thing, and that's it. And I think that's something important to consider for the future of digital humanities. I think the future is for young generations that can bring their ideas to the table. A lot of independent scholars, independent people that wants or is doing this kind of projects to move and to add on what is digital humanities. I think that's like really, really important so that this the students know how to maintain their projects, know how to continue these projects, because those are really important. And just the side of digital humanities in regards to activism, to social justice, to mobilize humanities and breaching communities, it's an aspect that DH has a lot to give. And it's very important. It's very important to take advantage of all these technologies to challenge or to intervene in these violent atmospheres that we're living in. Well, some of the projects in regards to, well, just one thing I forgot, I think it's also digital humanities is destabilizing hierarchies, destabilizing systems of control. Why? Because a lot of projects are working in collaboration, and in a collaboration that doesn't have to be hierarchical. That doesn't mean that if you're a teacher, you cannot work with a student. It's not at all, it's not like that. Students are now working with professors and are exchanging their knowledge rather than imposing this idea of how we have learned how academy works. They're destabilizing a lot of systems in which you see who has control or who has access to things that gives you power. And DH is questioning this a lot. So some of the projects that right now are working as a postdoc and complement to all this about activism, about social justice, and about creating a space for other stories to be told from their own communities. So because not all stories are silent. It's that they haven't had a platform sometimes to be heard, to be visualized. So one of the projects is Huellas Incómodas. Huellas Incómodas is a project that it's in collaboration with the university in Toluca, the university in Cuenca, Ecuador, and we are compiling material about the student movement, the student feminist movement that happened before the pandemic. So this student movement was protesting against gender violence, and they left a lot of these footprints. As you can see, murals, graffitis, a lot of videos of the protest, and we are collecting that in order to tell a story about the movement from the own voices of the people who participated in this movement, rather than the story that is being told in newspapers or from people in power that is saying that all these footprints were vandalism. Another thing that Huellas Incómodas is doing is that a lot of this material is being reposted in Facebook or in Twitter, in social media platforms, but that we don't have the control of someone that will erase that someone that is going to take all the information of the people that post that and put them in problems. So we're making that also. We're making people to be more conscious, activists to be more conscious of having copy of all this material, and also to compile all of this material, because it's very, very quick that there are posts and you don't see that post anymore later on. So that is the kind of work that Huellas Incómodas is doing. Later on, we will move towards Ecuador, in which we will also be doing that with a particular movement. And it is intended to do that with other activists, with other scholars from Mexico and Latin America, to preserve the footprints of social movements. So that's kind of Huellas Incómodas. You can visit the website and we have all the information about it. It's idrh.ku-huellasincómodas.org. Another project is Coming to the Heartlands, which is a project that it's with the Latin American and Caribbean Studies Center at the University of Kansas, and the African and African American Center at KU. And this project is collecting stories of migration, of people who have migrated from Latin America or from Africa and have arrived to Kansas. So what it is intended is to create a digital exhibit where people can see and hear the different stories of how people have come to the United States and then arrived to Kansas, because we know that Kansas has a really rich story of different migrations, and that's what the project will visualize. I'm in charge of creating the website, in which we will be using Omeka for participants to incorporate their story through the website. And then I will be creating a digital map. I call it a community map because people will be able to insert their story through the map. And then some digital exhibits of different topics or different places where they come from. So that's kind of the work that I will be doing in Coming to Her, or that I'm doing, because we're right now working on it. It's a little bit slower because of the COVID-19 that we're not able to visit the Latino communities around Kansas. And the last one is the MEPA, but what we will be doing in the MEPA project, it doesn't have a title yet. It's to create kind of a digital dictionary of the MEPA language that it's being, that communities from Guerrero speak in Lawrence. So this community migrated to Lawrence, and it's an indigenous community that speak MEPA. But what is happening now that they are on the diaspora is that the first generation in the U.S. is losing the MEPA because of the English as well as because of the Spanish. So this digital dictionary will create a way that young generations can learn their maternal language, as well as their parents can learn English. So it will be a community digital humanities project that is taking the ideas of other projects that have been done, like Dicha or the Living Tongues. But they work with indigenous communities in their own nation. So the Zapotec in Oaxaca. And in this case, we will be working with the community in the diaspora. So those are kind of the projects that I'm working at the University of Kansas, and as well as my own project that it's related to my dissertation, that it's half book and half digital project.
With that, I want to thank you, Sylvia, for coming on the show today and speaking to us generally about your thoughts on digital humanities, about your project, United Fronteras, and about the future of DH.
Thank you so much.
With that, thank you all for listening. We hope that you subscribe, share, and tune in for future episodes of DigiTalks.